So for more reaction, we now welcome Ritchie Torres, U.S. House Representative in New York's 15th Congressional District, joining us from New York. Thank you so much for your time here on I-24 News. So first, there is this disturbing spate of anti-Semitic incidents at some of the top campuses in the United States since the Hamas terror onslaught on the 7th of October. And then you hear the presidents of these institutions unable to answer direct questions whether calls for genocide of Jews violate rules of bullying and harassment on campus. What is your reaction?
I'm in a state of shock. During the hearing, when the presidents were asked, does calling for genocide of Jews qualify as harassment? Most Americans would have said, of course. But the presidents of UPenn and Harvard said it's context dependent. It's absurd, and it shows that our college presidents and deans are complicit in aiding and abetting anti-Semitism on college campuses. We've seen the hysterical and hyperbolic demonization of Israel lead to an outbreak of campus anti-Semitism, as well as anti-Semitism on social media. And if we, as a country in the United States, if we cannot bring ourselves to condemn the cold-blooded murder of Jews in Israel with moral clarity, then what are we becoming as a country? What does that reveal about the depth of anti-Semitism in the American soul? So there needs to be a serious reckoning with the deepening rot of anti-Semitism at the core of both academia and social media in the United States and beyond.
It was certainly staggering to hear the interactions in that hearing, quite something to see, and it raises the major concerns around the response from these college administrators or presidents. Perhaps the lack of response is a better way of describing it, creating this untenable situation for students and staff. Given that you are in New York, are Jewish students safe on campuses there? What are you thinking?
Look, I have no confidence in the leadership of our colleges and universities to ensure the safety of Jewish students. And keep in mind that any college or university receiving federal funds from the U.S. government is required to ensure the safety of their Jewish students, is prohibited by law from creating a hostile environment for Jews on college campuses. And so there needs to be more civil rights enforcement. We have to hold these institutions accountable for cracking down on campus anti-Semitism in their ranks. But so far, these institutions are in a state of denial about the depth of anti-Semitism. And so they're not part of the solution, they're part of the problem.
And one might think, as you alluded to, sympathies might be with Israel, especially when one sees the atrocities perpetuated on the 7th of October, the abduction of babies, women, men, the elderly, peace activists as well. And there are also Americans still being held hostage by Hamas and possibly other terror groups too inside Gaza. President Joe Biden says they're talking to the Qataris. What kind of impact can the U.S. have right now in helping to get all these hostages freed?
Well, even though Qatar is part of the problem insofar as it finances Hamas, the U.S. does have a strategic relationship with Qatar, and we can leverage the relationship to pressure Qatar, to pressure Hamas to secure the release of the hostages. But, keep in mind, Hamas did not release the hostages out of the kindness of its own heart. It released the hostages in response to military pressure from Israel. Without the military pressure, Hamas would have had no incentive to release the hostages, and Israel and the United States would have had no leverage to secure the release of the hostages.
So again, what can President Joe Biden do in terms of putting more pressure on Doha or any other player to make sure that there is a resolution where these hostages can get home and get home safely?
We have to send a clear message that if you're an ally of the United States, you have to stand with us, and you have to be instrumental in securing the release of all hostages, including the Israeli and the American hostages. You're either with us or against us. This is a morally clarifying moment.
And to that exact point, President Joe Biden has reiterated U.S. support for Israel visiting the country, obviously, as you know, in the early days of the war. But within the Democratic Party, there are obviously progressive members who have a different stance, including attaching conditions to security aid for Israel. Talk us through the rift within the party over support for Israel.
Well, we have to be careful not to mistake a visible vocal minority for a majority of Democrats. The leader of the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, has been unequivocally pro-Israel. The legislative leaders, both Majority Leader Schumer in the Senate and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in the House, have been unequivocally pro-Israel. And the overwhelming majority of Democrats are prepared to provide Israel with the funding that it needs to defend itself in the face of barbaric terrorism. There is a small subset of members, one of them happens to be Republican, but a few of them are Democrats, who want to condition aid to Israel. And that is a position that I emphatically reject. We have no greater ally in the Middle East than the state of Israel, and we should be strengthening, not weakening, our relationship with Israel in a time of terror.
Well, we certainly appreciate you speaking to us, and we appreciate your insights. Ritchie Torres, U.S. House Representative in New York's 15th Congressional District. Thank you for speaking to us live from New York. Thank you.